In this episode, we process what makes a D&D game fun for new players and how to balance specific expectations. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe whether on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, and share this episode with a friend if you'd be so kind. My name is GM Smudge, and welcome to the Smudgecast. What's up, everyone, whenever or wherever you are, and today this is a fun topic to talk through. I'm very excited about it because, in my opinion, when it comes to D&D, this conversation really isn't had with talking about new players, even new GMs, and how to step into a game and have success with your story for fun, for flavor, with people. And today I've got a good friend of mine, also named Steven.
Hi, Steven.
How's it going, Steven?
Oh, it's great.
Well, thanks for hanging out with me and chatting about this. This is really important for me because, not like I just prefaced, but also on top of that, with this conversation not being had very much, it's a great example because you are literally the epitome of a new player stepping in, playing once, and now we get to kind of process how it all went.
Yeah, I'm glad to share my wisdom with you, or lack thereof.
Yes, maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe for me too. But love to hear a little bit about just who you are and kind of then diving into just our relationship and how I got you to play D&D.
Yeah, absolutely. So Steven and I have known each other for a few years now, and I know that he's way into D&D,
What?
and I am not.
Yes.
And so I'm a guest on this podcast, and I played D&D all of one time. I had fun. I'm warm to doing it again, but I had no context going into it. But I saw the passion with which you talked about it and how much fun it was, and you invited me, hey, if I can be your GM, would you participate in a campaign? Do you have some friends that would be all excited about doing that? And yeah, we got a group of 4 of us together, and we did a 4-session campaign.
And again, that's why it's so important to talk through this, because from a GM's perspective, or from my head, I was like, okay, there's a lot that's got to go into this. There's a lot of talking about, preparing for, smart execution, and really, because my heart at the end of the day was like, I want these 4 people to want to play again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't want it to just be like this about me. I'm trying to offer an experience, which is more than, I think, maybe I'm tooting my own horn here, but I think that's more than what most people want for this game. It's like, I think people want to just come in, kind of lackadaisically play and do whatever, roll them bones and call it a day.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, I really cherish the experience, the story, and even in 4 sessions, which in the D&D world, which I don't know, you probably don't know this, I don't know if you do, maybe we have.
No, I don't know.
Just
assume that I don't know.
right, it's that 4 sessions in and of itself is not a lot.
Yeah.
1 session, when they call it a one-shot, I'm like teaching you stuff right now.
Sure.
It's funny. So the people, as you're listening, like, this is real.
Let me take notes.
Yeah. A one-shot being 1 session, you have to work through, that's, in my opinion, that's the hardest form of storytelling within D&D. You have to, a beginning and an end within one specific, I don't know, people play for 9 hours, but for us, 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 4 sessions in and of itself is like, okay, well, there's some beats I want to hit. Oh, man, I really want to get this part of it. Oh, it would be so cool to do this for them. Oh, man, how do I get this to happen? Because I think knowing these 4 players, these 4 people as humans, they may value that. So there was so much for me in this I was really hoping that you would come away with feeling and experiencing so many different things. And from our relationship beforehand, with how I would ask you for help with stories, it just felt very like, oh man, I gotta play D&D with this person. So when we would, like, I'd be like, hey Steven, like, we're like actually working our day jobs together, and
yeah.
I'd be like, hey, so there's this town they're gonna go into, this my other campaign I was playing, they're gonna go into this town, like, what are your thoughts? How did you react to me and all that? Was that silly?
I thought that it was, I was honored that you would even ask me. It got my creative juices flowing in a way that you don't really get asked to be creative in your everyday life very often. At least I don't. And so to be asked to be creative what would be a fun and interesting thing that could happen to these people, knowing that this is where they are, this is where they're coming from, this is their objective. How can we flesh out the story to make it more engaging, more fun? Where can we add conflict, surprise? And what I loved was that having no context for who they were or what they were doing, you would give me just enough to say, okay, this is where they're going. What are some of the names of the people who they might be interacting with? And come up with a backstory of the characters they're going to be interacting with. And I feel like just in bouncing ideas off of each other, we came up with kind of a really fun kind of side quest for the characters in your campaign to go on. And I remember you had been filming them at the time and posting them online, and I got to watch as they experienced a little bit of the story beats that we came
That's
up
right.
with. And I thought that was just so much fun, just to see the genuine joy and surprise and reactions that arose out of some of those moments that we had started to brainstorm together.
What about story? Now I'm kind of getting a little bit more philosophical here, just really quick. Like, what about story in and of itself do you love? Because that's going to help connect to a lot of these dots here. Like, why do you like storytelling? What makes that fun for you? What really made that us sitting there talking about Red Larch and the ghost that's haunting it and creating Benny or whatever who had the music box and like what? So can you connect those dots a little bit?
Yeah, so I went to college for film and video editing. And
I didn't know that actually.
yeah, well, now you learned something new. I really have always been interested in this idea of creating story, in telling a story. In my medium is through video. And so to be able to try and come up with a story where it takes place in your imagination, I'm picturing it from a cinematic perspective, and what are these places going to look like, and the emotional resonance that it's going to provide. I think no matter what medium that you use for storytelling, I think you're always aiming for that emotional resonance. What's going to land? What's going to hit hardest with the people who are going to be observing, or in your case, participating in this story that's unfolding and that they're having an active part in creating. So I've always thought that it was really fun to just try and come up with those things that are going to be just those key moments that stick with you, that you're going to really remember.
No one will know this, but your body language in it is so powerful. Like he's making double fists and like moving. You're like singing in a musical right now. Like, but what that tells me too, also with what you're saying is like it matters. It matters. It's fun. There is a powerful result that can come if it is executed well, and if you have like-minded people that are with you in the room.
Absolutely.
So then going back to all the things that you were saying about us getting together, we were chatting a bit. I was sitting in your living room. We were coming up with some of these stories. The point, I mean, I would jokingly be like, hey, we should play. Until that very moment I'm sitting on my couch, I text you saying, hey, let's get a group together. And I think I added your brother-in-law in there as well in that text. And it just sort of fledged out. For you, were you excited? Were you kind of like, well, that's fine, we'll figure it out, like it'll be whatever? What did you feel like?
I was excited. I felt immensely underprepared because the world of D&D, and maybe if you've been a part of it for a long time, you might forget what it was like to first dip your toe into it. I don't know if you know this, Stephen, but there's a lot of things to try and keep track of.
It's hard for me to understand that now, because when you're in something so long and trying to I did my best in trying to like get you to go, but like keep going.
So I am just being introduced to the idea that you get to choose your race and class, and you get to carry objects, and you can cast spells, and there's all sorts of things. And when you were helping me create my character, and we were going through, and we used D&D Beyond to do it, which I can't imagine how without a tool like that people can come up with all of these things just all on their own. I needed the guidance of that tool just to even comprehend how to get started. But I'm looking through all these pages and pages, and you were flying through like, click this, set this setting to that, and just because you knew what we were going to need for our campaign. But I was thinking, man, oh man, how do you keep track of all this stuff? How do you even know? And it made me a little bit of intimidated to play the game,
Yeah.
because in setting up all of these things, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to forget half of this by the time we start playing. I'm going to forget what a goblin can and can't do, what a warlock, which that's what I was, a warlock goblin, can and can't do, let alone trying to learn who else in my party, what they might be, and what sort of capabilities they might have. So I was not nervous, but I felt like I was unprepared, or underprepared, I should say. I did my best, but I knew going into it that I was going to be learning a lot on the fly as we went along.
Yeah, you absolutely had to. And I tried to think through on my side as the GM to think through things that actually mattered for you to know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it didn't really matter for you to know that in your D&D settings, you know, we're going to do variant encumbrance. We're going to make sure that it's going to be blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Like, that stuff doesn't matter. What I needed, but those are the things that we need to, like, fly through
Yeah.
so that we can get to the good stuff.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, like, it's, for me and all that, I was trying so hard to think of the things to simplify it as much as I could, but also there are so many people out there as like players, once you start playing, that like love that process.
Mm-hmm.
They love getting into the nitty-gritties of the character development, or like in the D&D and Beyond specifically, or like sitting with the GM and really talking through a lot about that. You know, how did it feel, not on like the mechanical side of things, but also then like when we started talking about the play, like your character? What was there an interest? Was it become more fun? Like, you know what I'm saying?
I loved the process of coming up with who my character was and what he was going to be. So my character's name was Graxel, but he went by the Provider. And I had a voice for my character, which I thought was more fun. And so if you've ever watched the TV show Lost, I based his voice on Sawyer from Lost. And it was kind of this like Louisiana bayou, kind of gravelly. So yeah, it's Graxel, the Provider.
Which, by the way, a new player stepping into it to do that, I mean, you were the only one.
Yeah.
but like to do that, that's why that's why you made it so much fun and so easy for me to do what I was going to do.
Yeah.
Because you were willing to step into and be that.
Yeah. I thought it was so much fun to try and come up with a character who was kind of like my polar opposite, because I'm a nice, friendly guy, but my character was this goblin who was a drug lord, and he was kind of like this smooth talking, like, but really powerful, hopefully really intimidating, which I love the contrast of him being 3 feet tall, but him having this presence that people are, he's notorious and people are aware of him. So I thought the process of creating the character was just a lot of fun. And so I was really excited for that part, to just participate in the session as this character who I was really excited to see what sort of adventures he would get into.
So we'll double click into this a little bit more and dive way deeper, but like holistically from the beginning to end, there's a lot that we'll unpack in here, but what did it just feel like to play and then come away with? So you, against 50,000 foot view of it, just what was it all like?
Wow, that's a big question. I felt like once I got my footing, and we did a kind of a session 0 type thing where we did kind of an example battle, or we did some example combat against just something that wasn't connected to our story arc, just to see the mechanics of the gameplay. But I think once I got my feet under me for how it was gonna go, I had a blast just trying to live out my character, trying to embody what he would do when put into these various situations. There were times when I struggled because you would be silent. You would be waiting for us to kind of decide, okay, what do you do? And I'm like, I don't know. What are the choices? What are the options? But that's kind of the point, is you were letting us to explore. With 4 new players, it was kind of hard to know who should take the lead, when I should hang back, when I should,
That's very
participate.
interesting.
And so, but all in all, at the end of 4 sessions, I was sad to end.
Yeah.
I wanted more time with this character. I had hoped even that our session could even take longer, but I know we had decided on 4 sessions, and that was the constraints we were within. But I think that's the mark of a successful campaign, right? Is that everyone leaves and they want more.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. We don't have the other 3 to to speak their opinion as well.
Yeah.
I thought it was very different for me to play with 4 new people completely, and trying to get like all of it juggled and get it all together.
Yeah.
But after I got done playing, I was like more stressed than I was thinking I was gonna be.
Yeah, because you're not only dealing with the mechanics of gameplay and guiding our story, you're dealing with personalities who some people are like, let's listen and see what Steven has to say. And some people are cracking jokes or not paying attention to very crucial, important story points.
Which is honestly like always happens,
Yeah.
regardless. And it's not about the GM me being like, I have something to say, be ready. But it's also like you all finding. It was interesting how you said like who was kind of leading and who wasn't, and kind of figuring that out. That's literally a juggle in most games, in most groups, unless you're playing a large campaign. Which again, anything that's under maybe 6 sessions. 6 sessions or less is so difficult, because you have, like I said, storytelling in that way is like you gotta get the plane up, and then you gotta get it to land.
Yeah.
There's turbulence up there, which is fun, and that's the story and the flavor, but it's gotta land somehow, or else it's gonna fall flat. Which, again, maybe we'll dive into. Maybe kind of was I don't know, could have been lame for you in experiencing that, because like you said, you wanted more. But I'd love to break all this down into 3 areas, because I think this is very helpful for either a GM that's having new players or wants to get a whole group to play, or you're someone who none of you have ever played together or played D&D at all, and how do we figure this out together? 3 areas to focus on stepping into your game. You got explanation, like the explaining of the game, preparation, preparing for the game, and then the execution, which is executing the game. So, shall we?
Let's do it.
Awesome. Talking about what you said earlier about making like things being complicated up front. I mean, it's so hard because you're learning a whole new game.
Yeah.
Like literally brand new.
Yeah.
So
It's that way with any new thing or new game that you step into. Even a board game, you got to learn all the rules before you can have fun playing.
But what was the most complicated part for you?
I think the most complicated part for me was trying to anticipate when certain types of things happened or were supposed to happen. When are we going to be just walking around exploring? When are we going to be talking to people? When are we going to be participating in combat? When do I roll the dice? How do I know when to add certain numbers or subtract certain numbers? What's a Constitution saving throw? All of these things are just like brand new terminology. I think was a big part of it, but also just the mechanics of gameplay. Like I said, I had no context for what actually a D&D gameplay session actually looked like. I had only seen in TV and films, the representation of nerds in a basement playing D&D, and I'm not calling anyone a nerd.
Yes,
who listens.
I will receive it, and I live it joyfully.
But that's just the way that the game is represented in popular media. Now that's changing. D&D is having a little bit of a heyday, and that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
But having only just a really 5,000 foot level of what the game actually was, I think I really needed time to settle into how is the game played, which, took probably all through session one to really understand. And by the time we got to session two, I could show up and I feel like, all right, I know a little bit more about what to expect out of this time that we're committing to sit around this table.
Yeah, and that's why when you're trying to like explain the game in that session 0, like we talked about, or where you
Mm-hmm.
brought up, it's so I even remember sitting there on the floor while you all are sitting on the couch, like trying to articulate the difference between like a saving throw and a skill check, and like why
Yeah.
that matters, or why why I can't even remember all the things, but it just felt like I remember sitting there. I could think of it right now, just like a loss of words sometimes because there's so much to unpack.
It's a tightrope, right? Because you want to, like you said earlier, you want to give just enough information so that it's useful without being overwhelming, but with so much that goes into the game, it's hard not to go too deep too quickly with someone who is starting from zero. So I feel like you balance that pretty well, but again, I've sat down with my brother-in-law to play board games that I've never played before, and he tries to explain all the rules up front, and my eyes just glaze over because I can understand the words that you're saying, but without something to connect it to, without being able to put what you're saying into practical context, it's not going to land. It's not going to stick with me.
So what would be more helpful? Because I think there's an element that what you're saying would be helpful to a player or a group of new players is like not explaining everything. So like what would be helpful, or what are some things we don't need to worry about talking through? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm almost thinking of, you know how there's like tutorial videos
Yeah.
on the internet for pretty much
Oh
everything.
my goodness, I know you're gonna yeah.
So what I think would be kind of interesting, I mean, and this is how I think I would
Yes.
receive the
Cool.
information, just as myself, but a video of people participating in D&D gameplay, and just you're just kind of watching it unfold, and then the GM says, okay, make a saving throw, and then the video pauses, and then someone comes on and says, this is the situation this person has found themselves in, and here's why they are making this throw. And so just being able to connect some of the new vocabulary that you're
That's cool.
learning, and the things that you are doing, the actual elements of gameplay other than just kind of walking around, interacting with NPCs and the rest of your party. Look, I've been listening to the podcast.
You get a gold star.
Oh, thank you. That's why I do it. But yeah, I think that idea of having something that is kind of annotated, where, again, a lot of people take it for granted, but it's kind of a D&D for dummies sort of thing, where you can see aspects of gameplay in action and then have it explained, because otherwise you as the GM are sitting down in our first session, and we have this this emotional arc and this build of what's happening, and we kind of have to interrupt the flow of it to explain a gameplay mechanic to 4 people who don't know what they're doing.
That's so lame.
Yeah.
That's so lame.
So I don't know if there's any way to really, really avoid that, but I think, you had sent me a bunch of resources of, here's a 20-minute video of what goblins are or what warlocks are. And that gave me some useful context, but I think going into actual gameplay, I think something like what I've just described would have been helpful for me to be
That's
able to
good.
get familiar with some of the key vocabulary I would have needed to know, and then its context within the gameplay.
And now that you say that, there are a lot of different videos out there. I think Critical Role did the Handbook or Helper. So those of you that listen and watch Critical Role, go look at the Handbook or Helper, I think is what it is. I can't remember if that's exactly it. But basically, they literally just walk through and in a fun, interesting way, explain all the different classes, but rules and different types of rules in a fun, meaningful way. yeah, now that you say it, I'm like, dang, that's a really good call out for a new player to send and give to them versus it being about what is a warlock. I think you could probably sit and have those conversations a little bit, spend 10 minutes, but then the mechanics and getting them prepped, I think, is a little bit more important to what you're saying.
Yeah.
I have a friend who is hell bent on never playing D&D, and they always talk to me about how literally what we're talking about, the explanation of the game is the literal roadblock for them to playing.
Yeah.
Now, I've played board games with them and learning it with them, and we both are just like eye rolling because some of these games can be exhausting, and I understand D&D can be too. But that's the very reason why they do not want to play ever, because there's way too much to handle and manage at the front of it all. Maybe even more so than a board game. Do you feel that that's true at times? Like more D&D is more difficult up front than a board game?
Yes and no. I mean, there's definitely a lot to it, as I've already mentioned, but board games nowadays, at least some of the ones that my brother-in-law likes to play, there's a lot of rules to them. And once you get it, it's second nature.
Right.
But the learning curve is the hardest part and the most frustrating part. And it's a roadblock for a lot of people, is just knowing that this is going to be too complicated, and the net result, what I'm going to get out of it, is not worth all of the effort and frustration of learning something new and the time that I'm going to sink into it. I think if I could tell this story, one of the things that pushed me over the edge is you were talking about D&D and you showed me this interview on a late night talk show with this actor. I can't remember his name. You'll know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, Tom Middleditch, and it was oh my gosh.
I forget which late night show it was. But he was explaining D&D in a way that I had really never heard it described before, as this story that exists in the imaginations of just him and his group of friends, and it's these memories that they're going to have forever, and you're connected to the memories and the characters as much as you would any real person in your real life or in your favorite piece of fiction, but even more so because you had a hand in deciding what the outcome was going to be. And the emotions are real, the joy, the laughter, the sadness, the tears. You know, he was getting so passionate about it. I'm like, man, I have to try this now, because what he's describing in D&D was all the same things that in my hobbyist doing film and video editing, that's the type of stuff that I'm going for as well, those emotional resonant moments. So I think that's what pushed me over the edge, be like, okay, if this is the type of impact that playing this game can have. Now, obviously, he was talking about something he'd been doing for 7 years, and we only played for 4 sessions, but I still felt that way. After our 4 sessions, I had developed a connection to my character and to the characters of all the rest of the people who were sitting down to play with me.
It was James Gordon, and they were literally just talking about D&D, and they asked him because James Gordon's like, I don't understand. And I remember sitting in your living room and be like, we should watching this, because it hit me. I was like, this is the best way I've ever heard it explained in like this weird, in like a, when I say secular, I mean just like non-D&D world.
Yeah.
Like the secular world on this talk show. And so, yeah, I'm 100% with you. There's another article, I can't remember the quote specifically, but it was during COVID 2020, and I think it was Apple that came out with it for some weird reason, and it was like families now playing D&D becoming the number one most family-oriented game in the United States, or in the West, something like that. And I think that that's the opposite of what I'm saying. What my friend said is like, there's so much to get into it, but there's also like, once you do, it can be this like simple Thursday night few hours if you are with your family, or if we were with one-on-one, which that's how I used to play D&D with my friend, was just literally in his kitchen. It was him and I. We did improv together, and that's how we started. And it was just, and I was a player. My first way of getting into it, we didn't even talk about rules.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't even get into it at all. We just were improvising, just being stupid.
Uh-huh.
But talk about, once you did get into it, like the episodes 2, 3, and 4, it just started to flow. And I remember you got a nat 20. I think it was episode 1, session 1, and you had the bow.
Yes.
You stood up.
I fired. Yeah. I had to physicalize this, but I had this bow, and I was shooting this arrow from the entire opposite side of this underground kind of tavern thing that we were gathering at this seedy drug lord auction we were at. And I had to do some combat, and I was all the way on the other side, and I'm pantomiming this right now, even as I'm recording this podcast, but I pulled back the bow, and I release, and it flies all across the room, and it's a direct hit, and it was just so satisfying. And that was like the last thing that happened that session, and I left feeling like $1,000,000. I was so happy that my little goblin from all the way across the tavern was able to kind of have the killing blow.
And it fills my heart with there's such joy to have been able to do that and have that moment, and have not even have the moment, but have you have the moment.
Yeah.
Because I think that's maybe the focus here. I want to ask you what you think the main focus is, or needs the most attention within explaining of the game. Like, what needs the most amount of time or most attention to when you're explaining the game to someone that's brand new?
Yeah, and again, you might have already done this, but in thinking back to myself and the things that I would have wanted to know, I think it would have been good to have an idea of how, like, roughly what percentage of the game is going to be combat. Because yep. I wasn't sure that any of it was going to be combat. It could have been kind of just this mystery where you're talking to people and you're finding out new information, and that's going to lead you to some other place. I didn't necessarily know that me, and especially the rest of the party that I was with, we didn't know each other. None of our characters had a pre-existing relationship leading up to the events of the session. So I didn't know how we were going to band together and participate cooperatively in a combat. And that was one of the things that you had to kind of guide us towards. I mean, obviously, combat begins when your character has basically no choice but to fight your way out of something. So the first time it kind of caught me by surprise, but once I kind of learned that this was the rhythm of it, I knew to expect some form of combat on a semi-regular basis, but I didn't know that going into the game. There was also a point where I want to commend you on the way that you did this. Some of our party had different ideas about what to do next.
Sorry, that's like the funniest. Sorry, that's such the typical funniest thing, and it's like so fun to know that a new person talking through it is just so funny. Sorry, I'm having a moment. I apologize.
Some people wanted to go take a long rest. Others wanted to go... What's so funny?
Because this is such a reality, and for new players to talk through this, it's not like a you newbies, but it's so real. This happens all the time.
And so it was something that we couldn't necessarily feel like we could resolve in the moment. And we asked you, hey, can we just split up then? And you said, you can, but, and you never said no, which that was one of the things that I was kind of afraid of in leading into the game. Was I would say, oh, Graxel wants to do this. And you say, no, can't do that. Just say something else. And then I feel like an idiot, you know?
That's horrible.
Yeah. But I was afraid that in not knowing anything about this complex game that I would say something that was wrong. But you would correct in such a way, or that you would remind in such a way having, experience under your belt with how to play and how to GM this game, you would say your party can split up. But what that will mean is that now the story is branching off into two different, branches, and you're not going to be participating in this other branch, or these characters are going to have experiences that your character's not going to know about. And so it really makes more sense to stay together. You kind of made the case for sticking together as a group. And so I think in doing that, or encouraging us to really consider the reality of where we're at and how a decision we make might affect our gameplay without necessarily telling us, no, you shouldn't, or no, you can't. I think that helped to guide our gameplay along to where it needed to be.
I appreciate that, and I think you guys were all very malleable too. Like you allowed me to speak into that, so that's a kudos to you all being willing and open. But the areas of trying to explain it all to get you to do that, or to even talk about a long rest, or like talk about any of these, like you said, those terms and stuff, it was just there was a lot that needed to go into it up top, and we spent a lot of time processing, talking, even like when it comes to like you were talking about like your Graxel, like, and the provider, and what does he do, and because you all were in the city, this one main city, and you all lived in the city for a long time, so you would know people, all these different story elements too. So let's go into the side of like preparing for the game, not necessarily explaining how to play and all this stuff, but like preparing for it. I think that got into a little bit more of, like you said earlier, like that's a little bit of more of the meat and more of the flavor of it and the fun. So what about preparing for we'll even just talk for the provider. What about that was fun also, or what side of it did you have to spend more time on too?
Yeah, one of the things that was unexpected is that, kind of as you just mentioned, you had asked me to come up with, okay, who are some people who Graxel knows? Who are some people that he's close to? And I had to think a little bit more deeply about this character who I'm like, okay, he's a goblin warlock, he's a drug lord, let's play. It's like, no. What's his motivation? Why is he doing this? What's the story behind the way that he makes decisions? How did he get to where he is today? And so just kind of doing the work of not necessarily writing out a full backstory for my character, but thinking, okay, how did this little tiny goblin become this massive drug kingpin within the city? And who are some of the people that he relies on? Who does he trust? Who does he not trust? I think that was a really interesting thought exercise, which in going into the first session, having thought about that, was it gave me more of an appreciation for how he would conduct himself within the setting that you placed us in. And so that was a good way to just kind of prepare from a character standpoint that I appreciated and I was not expecting, because in none of the parts leading up to creating my character was I asked to think so deeply about, how did he get this way, and what's his motivation, and what's his goal? What does he actually want?
Well, it required that because the story that we were telling, like for those of you listening, like this wasn't just like a dungeon delve that we just went into 4 different areas in a dungeon. They fought some stuff. Like this was, it was End Times and End All City. They were a group of people coming into a underground sort of casino-y / auction for black market items, and through that is when, like, somewhat of an alien invasion on the city. Like that's the story. So it wasn't like I think it's important to talk about, because that type of a story requires more preparation, more input from the players to understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, what's their characters do, what do they look like, what they would carry, why they would be there. So I think a lot of the legwork of for me was the preparation side,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily the explaining side. That really just is like really just making sure to make you to get your minds working a little bit. The
Yeah.
preparing is really about your character, your motives, like you hit on, you getting you sort of salivating on a couple information things that I want to give you,
Mm-hmm.
because I gave each of you a particular aspect of what you would know so that you could come to the table and be like, I think it was your wife's character that knew about like people like shaking hands with certain people and their hands were sweaty, like seeing people and they're kind of like their eyes would go glazed and they'd be fine, like super weird Truman Show moments. I don't know. But that for me was very, very important, and I think the out of all three of these, of explaining, preparing, and executing, I think your preparing side may even be more important and most important. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I mean, because the forcing me to think about my character made me think about how he would react in any given situation, and knowing that I could always go back to, okay, who is this guy? What's his motivation? How does he present himself to the world? And is that really who he is on the inside? Does he have a heart of gold, even though he's a drug kingpin? And I came up with that. To get this far, he had to really charm his way into people's lives and gain people's trust and surround himself with people who could really be the enforcers. And I wanted to have like these big bodyguards, which that went out the window when the aliens invaded our auction and everyone was basically killed except for our party.
Which dun dun dun, like that's D&D, like that's because what's gonna happen is only you survive it.
Yeah.
No, it's got to be all four of you. A bit.
Yeah. And so it was, I mean, what I liked in retrospect, what I was uncomfortable with at the time is that it did bring me out of my comfort zone. I thought I knew kind of what was going to happen, but then I'm asked a question of like, oh, should we start the auction, boss? And I'm like, Steven, are we supposed to start this? But that was session one, and by the end, I'm like, yeah, let's do it, and just responding in the way that my character would respond, and not necessarily asking for permission, just kind of having the confidence to just be like, yeah, this is what's happening next, and to take more ownership over the story, which going in, I thought that would be more on you, but I came to realize that it was, rather than 80% you, 20% us, it was much more evenly balanced than that we were able to be very collaborative about the way that the story was unfold. And you were, like you were saying, you had the beats in mind that the choices that we would make would inevitably lead us to certain outcomes, but we never felt like we were being coerced or forced into a certain way of doing things. We might have heard someone speaking outside, but of course, well, we want to go outside now. But it wasn't like you saying, go outside, everyone. There's something happening that you really should pay attention to. So I think in just sitting down and playing after a few sessions, it gave me a lot more confidence as a player as to, okay, well, I want to do this. I'm gonna go do this. And then I think navigating the interpersonal dynamics of the rest of the people who were playing, because I can't just say, I'm going to go do this, and then no one else wants to do it, because then that's no fun.
Another side of this whole preparing side of it all is, and I'm thinking, and I don't remember what we did. Did you talk to the other three players about your character before any of it?
No.
Did you? But like, did you even have a conversation? Like, did you talk to Adam about it all? Like
all I could see was the names and the pictures they had chosen, because that was in the campaign on D&D Beyond. But I didn't, and that was another thing that brought me out of my comfort zone, is you were talking about earlier how you had met with each of us to establish what only certain people know. Or even during the game, we would all make a roll, and some people's roll would make them privy to certain knowledge, and I had to leave the room or cover my ears, and that bugged the hell out of me because I'm like, what am I missing? But that's the character's going to feel that same way. If other people know something that he doesn't, then what's my best play? Do I be vulnerable with them? Do I strong arm them? Do I coerce them? Like what's going to get the most effective way of learning this? Do I even need to know this at all? So, but it was really uncomfortable knowing that there were people at the table that knew things that I didn't.
And that's more about the style in which you want to play, or what you want to, if it matters to the story. Like we said, it felt not only like, oh, this would be fun to do. I think it was a requirement for our story, a requirement for our game, that each of you came to the table with something that none of the other people like knew about, because I think that's real. I often talk about this with another friend of mine, another GM, which is like about world building, and we even did this a couple episodes ago, that the part of the goal is to make it so real that that's what immersion is getting so close to being inside something. Like that's the whole goal. And for new players, like that was very important for me. So so when it comes to preparing, and for me, I think maybe this is a lot about the GM and really getting you to know things and get excited about it. But like, what are some elements that a new player needs to prepare for? Like, what's their focus? What do they need to spend most of their time or their attention on?
I would say, you can prepare, and a lot of the things we've already talked about, prepare your characters, a little bit of backstory, have a little bit of an understanding of who they are, what their motivations are, because that's going to guide you during gameplay. But I think the biggest thing is preparing to be open to whatever is going to happen. I think if you can approach the table with that openness of, hey, I'm just one player playing this game amongst others, and that in the end we're all cooperating, and no one should be really monopolizing the experience or taking away from someone else's experience. I think going into it and not saying to yourself, what's the craziest thing I can do? What's the strangest, weirdest thing that's going to just blow everyone's mind? Not really try and make it about yourself, but think about how your party, how everyone else sitting around that table with you is also going to have the best experience. And I think that is something that, with all that you're already spinning around in your mind as a new player, the gameplay, the mechanics, I think that would be a really good piece of advice for anyone who's playing for the first time, is just be open to the process, be open to learning something new, but trust that this is going to be cooperative, collaborative, and we're all here to have fun, and no one's going to shame you for what you don't know, and
good.
No one is going to laugh at you or anything like that. This is all with the goal of you having a great time, using your imagination, and coming up with a story that's never been told before. And I think there's something really special about that.
There's a dream in there. Like, it's like, that's like the coming away, and we'll dive in right now into like the execution of it all. Coming away every session, like I never came away any of the sessions going, oh man, oh, this is like, oh, what are they going to do? Oh, this is kind of tight. Oh, this is not going to work. Like for me, and now I want to hear from you.
Yeah.
Coming away from each session, was there moments of like disappointment? And to be totally honest, was there moments of feeling like a loss of some sort?
I think on the whole, I walked away from the sessions being like, man, I wish it didn't have to end there.
Which might be the loss. You know what I'm saying? The disappointment.
But there were a lot of times where I would reflect on my experience. Like, what was I supposed to do when those two people were trapped in the cages? Was I supposed to save one of them? Were they both supposed to die? Was that always going to happen? If I'd made a different decision, could that have gone differently? And it was just really kind of unsettling, and the story beats kind of stick with you. but I was really, I was thinking back over the play-by-play and thinking, was there something I could have done differently, or that our party could have done differently? And if we had made another decision, would we have arrived at a different outcome? So yeah, I would say I really enjoyed the sessions for the most part, but yeah, I would leave and I would still be thinking about it.
Well, you are going to be. This is a very big statement. You are one of the most ideal players. Like, I'm not even kidding. For some, a GM would dream of having someone who'd be willing to spend additional thoughts outside of a game thinking about that said game.
Yeah.
Like, that just fills it fills me hearing you say that, because you spend hours and hours and hours of time developing, crafting, thinking, processing, moving, wanting, getting excited over. And yeah, it's not about you trying to be anything that I'm creating, but it's you living inside the very thing I'm creating. I think it was session 2. You all went to the tavern.
Yep.
Do you remember what it was called? I don't remember what it was called.
I don't remember.
You decided to go to this tavern to just chill.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even remember what it was for. But like, y'all decided, and like, I knew for me, I'm like, we've got an hour and a half left.
Yeah.
Like, my kid, like, I need to go to bed soon. Someone, like, Joey's done.
Yeah.
Like, but we need to get back on thing. But like, I can't not let you do what you want to do. Was there a tension that you felt in there?
Well, I felt like we were kind of straying away from what had just happened. I mean, we had basically witnessed a whole bunch of people get murdered. So there should have been, and maybe you do go to a tavern in that situation.
Have a drink.
I don't know. But I think you let us go to the tavern, and we interacted with some people, and we were asking some questions to like the bartender or whatever. But one of the characters went outside, and they saw this kind of viney, encroaching, like leafy thing like coming at them, and that was, it kind of brought us right back in. Okay, we might try and duck into this tavern, but the story is finding us even here, and the threat is becoming unavoidable. We can't just go hide from it. We're forced to confront it. But it didn't feel like it was something like you were like forcing us into it. It felt like, okay, this thing, we had no idea of the scope of it, but now that we're here in this tavern and it has found us even here, okay, well, now we're forced to confront it. I think right after that there was like a earthquake, and like the ground opened up, and we're like, oh dang, this is real. We got to do something.
Well, that makes it a great point, because that was the type of story we were in, and we talked about like feels like this is going to be a big action adventure epic, which connects back to like, why was there so much combat? Well, I think there was, out of the 4 sessions, there were 3 moments of combat. And I want to say moments because it's not like it occupied the entire session.
Right.
It was maybe 30 minutes of just something that was intense, excitement. But I want to hit on, though, like, it's important, though, that, I'll say it this way, you made me improv. You forced my hand in the sense of like, I need to figure out a way strategically that doesn't feel like get back in line, but to like story-wise get you to go somewhere, or get you to be excited about something, so that you would want to do it, right? But in all that, and not trying to force your hand, though, in the sessions, was there anything that you felt limited, though? I know you've been really kind and saying not really, and things were, like pretty good. And was there any element, though, that felt like, this is actually kind of limiting me from what I want to do, or the potential of the outcome, or even talk about the dice, because that's the thing that we are rolling to figure out if something works or not, hypothetically.
Yeah. So I felt like the limitations that we ran into, or that I felt, were largely self-imposed.
Interesting.
I don't feel like there was limitations in the gameplay that felt overly restrictive. I was, it all made sense. If my character is at this level, then he's only going to be able to use X number of spells. And so I was kind of holding on and saving one of the really powerful ones because, all right, I knew, all right, we're only in session 2, 3. I'm going to save this for session 4 because it's the most powerful thing I got, and I got to keep it in my arsenal to be able to use it when we fight the real big bad, which I knew was coming. So I feel like a lot of that was self-imposed. I wish that I had thought to do more things, or to investigate more things, or to ask more questions, or to interact with more people. And I know, again, that in 4 sessions it was difficult to do that, but I was in my head really in this world, and at one point we ran into one of my drug distributors, or I think there were twins. It was, or there's 2 of them.
Again, this is another improv moment.
And so and what was funny is that it made everyone else in the party not trust me, because I had relationships with these seedy individuals where, hey, regardless of what I do for a living, I'm just a humble drug purveyor. I'm a provider. People want the drugs, I get them the drugs. That's the way I see it. But it made everyone else not trust me, so I had to really try and convince them that I was trustworthy, if even reluctantly. But I think, like I said, a lot of the limitations were ones that I put on myself. I need to make sure that we get to where the story's going, but I could really picture a world that was a lot bigger than what we had time to interact with.
Huge in scope.
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense. But like when it comes to it's a big world. Was there anything that you wished you would have done? Like, was there any other exploring or any other problem solving that you wish that we could have tried or done differently, or like different story? Like, did it feel like what we did make sense, or did you feel like there was more that we should have spent more time on?
So I feel like when you were giving us you were showing us the map of the city, and you were showing us, here's where the elite people live, here's where, like, where all of the governance within this town takes place. I thought that would connect in some way to the story. Like, you were providing that information because we would be interacting with the people in power, and maybe we could try and come up with a solution for this attack, alongside some other people. I thought that having this information, which I now understand, was just the information that anyone living in the city would know. I thought that more of it would come into play in the game, but some of it was just for color. Some of it was just so that my character knew where he would operate within this town. And it made sense that we didn't really have a lot of interaction with those people, because the nature of what I do, I would be in the more seedy neighborhoods, distributing my drugs. Enjoy it all.
That's right, and you came up with that, which was really cool. But what I'm hearing you say in all this too, with the execution side, is still a little bit about what you were saying about the preparation. Is like, be open to a really interesting experience, while also making sure that you're going to talk to your GM about, like, how is this all going to play out? Is there going to be a lot of combat? I would even ask, if for those of you that are getting new into play, if you've never played, or a GM, you're going to start playing with new players, really get them to understand that the story, not only just the story, but like how much combat is there going to be, how much exploration is there going to be, the role play that's coming into be, how that's going to all literally be played out experientially. Because like you said, I think in session 0 we did some of that too. We did like a small thing.
We had run into some creature, and we had to make sure that they didn't bother us anymore, essentially.
Right, exactly. But within executing, you it's hard because, like we said, there was just a short amount of time.
Yeah.
But I do think it was worth our own story limitations, that we can only do so many things because it needed to come to an end.
One of the things, talking about execution, that I was very grateful to have was that you had come and you had set up terrain and you had little minis that represented us. And I feel like for the most of the session where we would be just talking, interacting with people, that was fine. I could imagine what that was going to look like. But when it came to combat, and especially knowing the limitations of, oh, I have to be this amount of feet away in order for my spell to actually hit, I think that was really valuable for me to be able to see and visualize on a little miniature right in front of me, because otherwise I think it would have been really hard for me to mentally keep track of, like, okay, I'm retreating a little bit, but have I retreated out of range of my enemy?
Right.
And so I think from an execution standpoint, having something like that helped me visualize, okay, for the instance of we're going to be in combat, where the enemies are, where I am in relation to those enemies, and it helped me to choose, okay, what spell am I going to cast? What weapon am I going to use that's going to be most effective? So just from a purely like execution standpoint, I felt like that was really helpful to me, because if it's all in your imagination, like I said, for the interactivity part, for interacting with your party and with the other NPCs in the world that you're in, I feel like I can use my imagination. I can picture that pretty well. But when it comes down to combat, and there's very specific things that you want to keep track of, having that as miniatures right in front of us on the table, I don't know how I would have participated in combat without it.
Yeah, and there's so many different ways, and we're very fortunate that I'm able to have a plethora of different terrain and minis for us to be able to access and use, because that's just the most fun for me. I just really enjoy doing that, and I enjoy the shock value of when I lift up the page and you see all of this stuff in front of you. It's like, whoa, how is this all going to play out?
Yeah.
Or the ship, right? Your ship,
Yeah.
and you're flying in the air to the mothership of these mind flayers. Like, it's just like, how is this all going to play out? So
yeah, that was incredible.
So boiling these down a little bit, again, for both the GM, getting new players that are just stepping in, explaining the game, preparing for the game, executing for the game, how would you kind of like layer in the most important pieces, or the most, like, boil down these points for explaining the game, preparing the game, executing the game?
So in explaining the game, for the GM, I would say have patience with your players, because you might need to explain things 10 times. It might not sink in until your players are able to connect it with something that happens in the context of the game. And players, same thing. Be patient. You are having a lot of information that is all meant to help you to enjoy the game, but there's a lot of it. So try and, get that information, internalize it in small doses, whatever works for you as an individual, but just know that there's going to be a lot to learn, but it's all with the intent of you being able to really have the greatest amount of enjoyment and fun in playing this game. And we're not just trying to overload you with information. The GM saying, look at all the things that I know. I'll bet you can't remember all of this. I'm stupid. So smart. No, it's all so that you can have the greatest amount of enjoyment of the game. So in the explanation, I would say the patience is good. In the preparation, I would say creativity. I am just such a, like...
Yeah, you are.
You are. Is that sarcastic?
No, you are so creative, because the preparation side, really quick, is like the character, the story, the how you're going to influence coming to the game, and just all the things in the getting ready to play.
Yeah. So when you are really creative in that preparation, you're stepping into a fantasy world, and I would say like your this is gonna sound so cliche, but your imagination is the limit. And if you can picture what this world is going to be like, and if you can really think about who your character is and what they're going to be, and who the other people you're going to be interacting with are going to be, and just be open to being right and wrong about, you know, your preconceived notions going into the game, I would say use this as a time to not just do the bare minimum, but I think a little bit of extra time being creative in the preparation phase is going to make you more excited to play. Yep. Because you've really thought through, and you've excited yourself by the ideas you've been able to come up with. And if it happens during the course of the session, great. If not, that's a little thing that just you get to enjoy. Just your little thought about, oh, my character might have had this memory or experience or other people they've interacted with that never came up in the game, but it informed the character. So yeah, I would just say, really go deep in being creative in the preparation for the game.
Love that. And then for execution, I would say for the GM side, it's really important that you don't say no. Truly, find another way to say yes and offer them another opportunity to keep trying out the various things that they're wanting to do. Because if you're a GM that's coming from playing with a bunch of veteran players, you're really going to impose on your players' creativity if you treat them as such, because I think they're so, in the business world, you call someone green, meaning they're just open, they've got fresh eyes. Mm-hmm. So it's just like you don't want to stifling the story. Let them do what they want to do, and let the dice tell the story in that way. Yeah. From a player side, what do you think?
I would say that from an execution side, to get out of your own head about it, and maybe this is just me personally being in my own head too much, but to get out of my own head of, am I going to say something wrong? Am I going to do something wrong? Am I going to roll the wrong thing? Am I going to be asking too many questions? Just follow that gut instinct that you have, without the fear that you're going to do something wrong, because that totally frees you up, I think, to have more fun.
Well, I hope this week you as a GM or you as a player, whatever stage you're at, you can get more comfortable with playing a game with new players, or just playing a new game that in the creative experience and silly experience, the impactful experience that you can have while playing D&D. And if you're having trouble and you need support in any way, maybe as a GM in processing how to get this game ready for new players or whatever, if you got a new player that's stepping in, please message me at GM Smudge on Instagram or on TikTok, all one word. And where can people find you if they want to ask you more questions about new playing or something like that?
Yeah, I don't know how much else I'll be able to say to you, but you can find me at Stephen Osters, that's with a PH, on Instagram, and I'll be happy to share anything that I can.
I love that. Make sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell, follow me on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so that you can get notified each week when an episode drops. Please share. That helps so much, and it's a great conversation to have with some new players too. Let them in on this conversation. And then lastly, make sure to add value to your game so your game becomes more memorable. See you later.